This video is about when to divorce in an abusive relationship. If you or a friend are in an abusive marriage, I hope this helps you make the decision about whether to stay or leave. And we're starting right now. So we'll look at 3 helpful perspectives and questions you can ask yourself to decide whether to leave an abusive marriage. At the end of the video, I'll also give quote unquote my opinion on the real answer about when is the right time to leave. So the first question you can ask yourself is, are children being affected in any way by the abusive behaviors from one parent towards another? And this doesn't just mean physical violence. It could also be verbal abuse, emotional abuse, lying, toxic criticism, constant blaming. Any of those abusive patterns, whether physical or verbal, ask yourself if that is affecting children in any way. Here's why I think this is so important. And I'm not a mental health professional, I'm not a psychologist, just wanted to give you my opinion. It makes sense to me that kids learn from their parents about how to function in relationships. And so it seems like if your kid is seeing that kind of behavior, even from one of the parents towards the other, it's more likely that they're going to learn either to act that way towards their partner in the future or to tolerate that type of behavior from a partner or somebody else in their life in the future. And really neither of those things is very good for a kid to learn. It puts them at a greater risk of either becoming an abusive person in the future or of being the target of an abusive person in the future. After I got through my personal situation and I shared with friends, family, colleagues, people I knew about what had happened, there was a story someone told me where they said, "That's so great that you left that situation that you were in. When I was a kid, my mom stayed in a situation where she was being treated like that, and it messed me up." And I'll always remember that quote from that person that I know well that told that to me, who I never knew had any of that going on until I shared about my own story and they shared this back with me, because it made me so glad that I did leave when I did. And imagine, if you're trying to decide whether to stay or leave and there's any kids involved, how would you feel if 10 or 20 years from now, your child is dealing with the effects of having lived for 5, 10, 18 years in a house where one of the parents was behaving abusively? If they're having to tell somebody that they were messed up because they had to grow up in an environment where that was treated as normal in their house, that's a strong reason to consider leaving an abusive marriage. So the second reason to consider leaving an abusive marriage is if real change is not happening. I think many people who stay in abusive marriages, they don't think that they're going to be in an abusive marriage forever. They stay because they think there's a chance that the marriage can go back to what the relationship originally seemed like, which many people report that their relationship did not seem abusive for the first months or years of the relationship and later became abusive. So they're not staying in the marriage just because it's abusive and they're just staying. They're hoping that it is going to change into something else or to change back into what they thought that it was before. You need to be honest with yourself. How much time has gone by? Is real change happening? Or, as is much more common in many more situations, that the abusive person may promise to change for a period of time, has a ton of excuses, blame shifting, gaslighting, blaming the victim, blaming external factors, blaming their environment, saying they can change if their stress changes, or they can change if you change the way that you act towards them, or they'll change when their job calms down, or whatever it is, right? They blame a bunch of other factors, they promise to change a little bit, and then over time, there's not actually real change. It just kind of goes back to the way that it was, or there's a lot of broken promises about change. Just be real with yourself about whether the person is really changing and what are the real results that you're seeing. In most cases, the change never actually materializes. I have literally never heard a single story from a target of an abusive marriage where the person actually did change back into a non-abusive person. I don't know why that is. Again, not a psychologist or anything, but that's the clear pattern that I've seen in literally every story that I've ever heard. So just take a moment, ask yourself if you're really seeing change, and if you're not, consider leaving that situation. Here's the third and final question you can ask yourself to help yourself decide whether you want to leave an abusive marriage. If the person changes the maximum amount that you think they're capable of change, would you really want to spend the next 60 or 70 years of your life married to this person? This is a helpful question because it almost sets aside the abuse. It says, okay, let's say if they change as much as I think they're capable of, is that somebody I want to be married to? It's kind of a different angle. It's actually really helpful, and it was helpful to me personally. I'm not saying if they changed like magically into a perfect version of themselves. I'm saying think about what is the most they are capable of really changing. You know, if you gave them like 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, right? Think about what that person is, who they are, and think about you spending 60 years with that person. Um, and if the answer is no, then maybe you know already that in your heart, like if you really think about it, that this isn't the person that you want to spend the rest of your life with. I'm not sure why this question is so helpful, but it really can be. Sometimes when people have a problem that's right in front of them, like the abuse or the abusive behavior, they spend a lot of focus on that problem and fixing that. But if you almost look past it and you say, okay, let's say I fix it as well as I possibly can, realistically, what is the next period of my life going to look like? And is it right for me to be married to this person? So now that I've shared 3 helpful questions, here's what I personally think is the right answer about when the right time to leave an abusive marriage is. Again, this is my opinion, but here it is. The right answer is it's almost always right to leave an abusive marriage because abusive people in the long run don't tend to change. This can be really hard to have to learn yourself, but if you look at the stories that people tell, and if you look at counselors who have worked with like hundreds or thousands of abusive people, the pattern that emerges, at least that I've seen, is that almost no abusive people actually make lasting change in the long run. If you know that in advance, it can save you, in theory, from having to spend years and years of your life with that person, trying to help them work through their issues and, you know, change into a person with healthy mindsets about relationships, etc. If you're interested in learning more about that, I invite you to check out some of the links in the channel below where there's helpful videos on that topic. Can abusive people change? How quickly do abusive people change, etc. The other reason I think it's almost always right to leave an abusive marriage is that it doesn't just affect your relationships, it affects every part of your life. Being in an abusive relationship can affect your self-confidence, it can affect your career, it can affect what types of opportunities you put yourself out there for. It can affect your family relationships. It's often very isolating. It can affect your friendships. It can affect your children. It can affect their children. It's easy to think of your marriage or your relationship as like just your marriage or just your relationship, and then you have all these other parts of your life. And that's actually not true. All of the parts of your life are affected by something as important and central as your marriage. And when you see it that way, being in an abusive marriage, even if it didn't start that way, it's just so damaging to all of those other parts of your life relative to what your life or your kids' lives or others, you know, should look like, that it's almost always correct to leave that situation. Even though I know that that is a very difficult decision to make, it's a very hard thing to do. It can be a dangerous thing to do in some cases, depending on the individual that you're dealing with. But that is my opinion about what the right answer is. If you are in that situation, I invite you to check out the links in the channel below for more helpful advice and content about abusive relationships. Good luck with your situation, and thanks for watching.